Consequentialism is another major theory of formative ethics. It's different from deontology. Instead of assessing actions by a moral rulebook, you assess them according to their outcomes. An action is good if its consequences are good, and vice versa. In other words, the ends justify the means. In consequentialism, an act is not intrinsically good or bad. To determine good or bad, look at the consequences. So, you must weigh the potential consequences before doing an action. Any moral code you have is subordinate to what the action produces in reality. For example, if the decision is to ration vaccines, the priority might be given to the elderly or high-risk populations due to high risk of infection. Or they may be given to healthcare workers due to their high social utility. How would a consequentialist weigh consequences? By itself, consequentialism does not prescribe a correct way to do this. But you can ask yourself questions. What is a good consequence? Or what is a bad consequence? Who is primarily responsible for the action? Or who is affected by the action? Or what is affected by the action? And finally, do I actually have the authority to make these judgments for a particular action? An example of how to apply this is with self-driving cars. A good consequence will allow for optimized traffic flow and that everyone gets to work on time. A bad consequence is that pedestrian routes, if not accounted for, may be affected and cause harm. Remember, consequentialism is a general idea, but more detailed theories have come out of it. The primary consequentialist theory is utilitarianism. Jerry Bentham from the 18th century and John Stuart Mill from the 19th century are its main proponents. The guiding principle is that whatever maximizes good consequences is what determines the best action. In other words, the most moral action is one that leads to the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. This happiness is called utility. A utilitarian considers the welfare of all people to be the most important consequence. This is in contrast to other consequentialist theories like egoism and altruism. The former is about maximizing the self's happiness, and the latter is about maximizing others' happiness. For example, utilitarianism can be used to justify military force or war. The consequences of war may ultimately be beneficial, and it can't really be justified by deontology since it involves killing people. Or utilitarianism can be used to justify business decision. It can account for cost versus benefits of some business tasks. Now, one of the difficulties of utilitarianism comes in measuring utility. Try this example and try to determine what is more useful. For example, an autonomous vehicle on a collision course. If it veers right, it would kill a blue-collar worker. If it veers left, it will kill a Nobel Prize winner. Can we quantify which would have greater utility? Mill proposed a hierarchy of pleasures. People value certain pleasures over others. This cannot be qualified, but is a matter of judgment. Now, utilitarianism is usually divided into two competing ideas, act and rule. In act utilitarianism, individual acts themselves are judged based on their maximized utility. For example, giving money to charity. Money increases happiness for many people, not just yourself. In rule utilitarianism, an action is good if it conforms to a rule that maximizes utility. Now, unlike deontology, these rules are not more important than the consequences. Let's examine some strengths of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is intuitive because we tend to think of ethical actions as leading to happiness. It also considers consequences to all people, so utilitarianism has an element of fairness. And it offers more flexibility than deontology. Now, on the flip side, there are some things that you could be doing right now to maximize happiness for the world, but you don't always do this. One weakness of utilitarianism is that people tend to focus on themselves. And it's difficult to know what is truly pleasurable, even for one's own self. And people disagree on what is pleasurable. For example, volunteering our time. Some people may find pleasure in volunteering their time to help others, but others may not. Another drawback is that it's difficult to determine utility for certain choices. You might be faced with choices that seem to maximize utility equally, but how do you decide? In this case, every choice can be quantified. Finally, one other weakness to consider is that immoral acts may maximize utility. For instance, if a healthy person could donate their organs to save multiple people, would it be justifiable to kill that healthy person? Utility is maximized at the cost of a seemingly immoral act. Now, to wrap up, consequentialism and utilitarianism contrast with deontology. They promote the importance of evaluating outcomes to actions where morality is judged based on maximizing good and minimizing bad.